It was supposed to be just another ordinary day at the airport. A young woman walked confidently through the terminal, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her suitcase rolling behind her. She had done nothing wrong, yet the look she received told a different story. Whispers spread, security closed in, and then, without warning, she was pulled aside, her every move questioned, her presence doubted, as if she did not belong. The humiliation unfolded in front of strangers. They're silent. Stares cutting deeper than words. The staff claimed it was procedure, but the truth was far more painful. They had no idea who she was. They had no idea who was about to arrive. Because in that moment of prejudice, they set off a chain of events they would never forget. What happens when racism blinds authority until it is too late? Sasha Obama had grown up under the brightest spotlight in the world. From the moment her father stepped into the White House, her face had been photographed, her movements reported, her life judged not as a child's, but as a symbol. Yet beneath all the headlines, she was still just a young woman trying to live, to learn, and to carve her own place in the world. She wanted normalcy, moments of quiet where she could breathe without the weight of a famous last name pressing down on her shoulders. That morning at the airport, she was not the daughter of a former president. She was simply Sasha dressed in casual clothes, carrying a yellow suitcase and a backpack, excited to board a flight for personal time away. For her, travel had always been a chance to blend in, to walk through crowds unnoticed, to feel what ordinary life was like. She loved the energy of airports, the constant announcements, the families rushing with luggage, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from kiosks. It made her feel free, untethered from the image the world had created of her. But beneath the comfort of her routine, Sasha knew something else. Her skin color had never gone unnoticed. She had seen it in classrooms, in restaurants, in places where silence cut deeper than insults. Growing up in America, even with privilege and power surrounding her, she had never been fully shielded from the sting of prejudice. She knew that sometimes it took only one suspicious glance, one judgmental assumption, to change the course of an ordinary day. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She walked with confidence, ticket in hand, blending into the wave of travelers. Yet, as she neared the security checkpoint, she felt it, that subtle shift in atmosphere. The way conversations slowed, the way eyes lingered just a little too long. The uniformed staff who had greeted other passengers with polite smiles suddenly looked sharper, more suspicious. One officer leaned to another and whispered, their eyes locking on Sasha as though she carried something more than a suitcase. She felt the weight of their stares before they even spoke. It was a familiar heaviness, a reminder that no matter her achievements, no matter her family name, some people would always see her first as different. Her heartbeat quickened. She told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining it. Yet, deep down, she knew better, because prejudice rarely announces itself with words. It begins quietly, in the smallest of gestures, a suspicious glance, an unnecessary question, a smile withheld. And for Sasha, those signals were already gathering, around her like storm clouds before the rain. What she did not know was how far this moment would spiral, and how the people standing just beyond the checkpoint would come to regret the decision they were about to make. Sasha stepped forward, her boarding pass in hand, expecting the same. Routine she had seen 100 times before. But instead of the polite nod she anticipated, the officer in front of her stiffened. His eyes narrowed, scanning her face as though searching for something that did not belong. Step aside, he said flatly, gesturing to a cordoned area near the checkpoint. Her breath caught for a second. She glanced around. Other passengers were being waved through with quick smiles, their luggage sliding along the conveyor belts without hesitation. No one else was being stopped. Just her. Confused, she obeyed. She tried to stay calm, to remind herself that she had done nothing wrong, yet the whispers began almost immediately. People in line turned their heads, their eyes darting between her and the officers. The scene unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if each second was meant to isolate her further. Another staff member walked over, his face cold, his tone harsher. "That necessary. Open your bag." She unzipped her backpack, her hands steady, but her heart racing. He sifted through her belongings with exaggerated suspicion, pulling out items as though expecting to uncover a hidden threat. A simple notebook was flipped through, as if it held dangerous secrets. A pair of headphones was held up, inspected, and tossed back with disregard. Passengers shuffled by, pretending not to watch, but their silence screamed louder than words. Sasha felt the sting of humiliation pressing against her skin. She knew this scene. She had read about it, seen it, happen to others. Black travelers stopped, questioned, doubted while others breezed past. And now, despite her name, despite her background, she was not spared. The officer finally looked up, his lips curling into something close to disdain. "Step over here. We need to run a further check." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to demand why she was being singled out. But experience told her that speaking up would only fuel suspicion. So she complied, standing in the small square marked on the floor, while uniformed figures circled her like hawks. Minutes dragged like hours. Each time she thought they were finished, another question came. Where was she going? Who was she meeting? Why was she traveling alone? Every answer she gave seemed to be met with disbelief, as though her very existence was a lie. And then came the moment that stripped the last layer of her composure. One of the officers leaned in, his voice low but sharp. "People like you always think you can get away with anything." The words pierced deeper than any physical blow. They were not about her documents, not about her suitcase. They were about her identity, her skin, her heritage, her right to stand there. Sasha froze, her stomach twisting. She felt exposed, cornered. Around her, travelers walked on, some glancing in pity, others in indifference. None intervened. She was alone under the crushing weight of judgment. The staff escalated further. Her suitcase was pulled apart piece by piece. Clothes were tossed carelessly, folded memories scattered on the cold inspection table. Every gesture screamed not of procedure, but of punishment, a deliberate attempt to break her dignity in front of strangers. Her voice finally cracked through. The silence. "Why are you doing this?" The officer did not answer. Instead, he waved another colleague over. "She's not cooperating. Escalate it. Escalate." The word sent a chill down her spine. Two more officers appeared, larger, more intimidating, standing close enough to remind her of the imbalance of power. The message was clear. Resist, and the consequences would multiply. Her heart pounded. For the first time, fear eclipsed her frustration. She could almost feel the headlines forming. Sasha Obama detained at airport. She imagined the whispers, the judgment, the twisted narratives. But more than that, she felt the crushing realization that, at this moment, her name did not protect her. Her father's legacy did not shield her. She was just another young black woman being treated as less than human. And then came the final blow. The officer looked at her, his voice raised enough for others to hear. "You're not flying today. Step aside, you're being removed from the boarding list." Removed, kicked out, stripped of the right to continue. The humiliation burned so hot it felt like fire coursing through her veins. She wanted to scream, to demand justice, but the air was heavy with authority, suffocating her words before they formed. The crowd moved faster now, passengers eager, to avoid being entangled in the scene. To them, she was an inconvenience, a disruption in their smooth travel day. Few saw the cruelty for what it was. Fewer cared enough to stop. Sasha stood frozen, watching as her suitcase was pushed aside, her boarding pass torn, her freedom reduced to scraps. The airport staff turned away, satisfied with their judgment, their power exercised without question. She felt smaller than ever before, swallowed by the cold machinery of systemic prejudice. But what the officers failed to see was the storm quietly gathering beyond those walls. Because Sasha was not just any traveler. She was the daughter of a man who had spent his life fighting for justice, for equality, for the very dignity that had just been stripped from her. And in that moment, as she stood alone under the fluorescent glare of the checkpoint, she knew something they did not. This injustice would not remain hidden. Her father was on his way. What happens when prejudice collides with power, when the very man who once led a nation walks in to witness the humiliation of his daughter? The answer was moments away, and the staff who had mocked, doubted, and discarded her would soon face a reckoning they could never have imagined. The air in the terminal grew heavier, charged with a silence that felt unnatural. Sasha stood rooted in place, her belongings scattered, her dignity stripped bare under the fluorescent lights. Every second stretched, a cruel reminder that she had been reduced to nothing more than suspicion. The officers' faces were stern, unyielding, their authority a wall she could not climb, and then it worsened. One officer stepped forward, his tone dripping with accusation. "You think rules don't apply to you? You think you can walk in here and get a free pass?" Her lips parted, trembling with the words she wanted to shout, that she had followed every rule, that she had done nothing wrong, but fear locked her voice inside. The weight of their judgment pressed her into silence. Passengers hurried past, eyes lowered, their pace quickened as if the scene unfolding before them was contagious. No one stopped. No one spoke up. To intervene would be to risk drawing the same suspicion, and so they let the injustice pass by like a shadow on the floor. Sasha's suitcase lay open like a wound, her clothes strewn carelessly, a notebook kicked to the side, as though it were contraband. Each item was a fragment of her life, now turned into evidence of a crime that did not exist. And yet the officers acted as though they had uncovered something sinister. One of them leaned close, his voice sharp enough to cut. "You're not welcome here. We're escorting you out." Her body went cold. The humiliation had reached its peak, being dragged away like a criminal in front of hundreds of strangers. Her name attached to disgrace she did not deserve. The daughter of a president reduced to a spectacle of racial profiling. Her chest tightened, the reality settling in. This was no longer just about a delayed flight. This was a deliberate attempt to erase her humanity, to remind her that no matter her background, she could still be branded as less than. She tried to gather her strength, tried to speak. "This is wrong," she whispered, her voice shaking but firm enough to carry. But the officer dismissed her with a smirk, waving her words away like they were meaningless. "Save it." The grip of authority closed in. Two officers moved closer, their bodies forming a barrier, ready to march her out. Panic surged in her chest, her pulse thundering in her ears. She could see it already. The headlines, the humiliation, the world watching. Her degradation unfold. And just as they reached for her, just as her fear threatened to consume her completely, the crowd parted. A ripple of recognition spread through the terminal. Heads turned, whispers grew louder, and suddenly the atmosphere shifted from indifference to shock. Because at that moment, walking toward the scene with a steady, unyielding presence, was Barack Obama, the same man whose speeches had inspired millions, the same man who had carried the hope of a nation, the same man who had taught his children that dignity and equality were worth fighting for, now faced with the sight of his youngest daughter being treated like a criminal. The officers froze, their arrogance colliding with disbelief. They had not realized who stood before them, who they had dared to humiliate. And in that split second, the balance of power began to tremble. Sasha's breath caught. Relief flooded her eyes, but it was mixed with something else, fear of what this moment would ignite. The entire terminal fell silent, waiting, watching, as Barack Obama stopped just a few steps away. His expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the officers who had stripped his daughter of her dignity. And then, in a voice calm yet sharp, enough to slice through the silence, he spoke 4 words that would change everything. "What is happening here?" The silence that followed his words was unlike anything the airport had ever felt. Every eye was fixed on Barack Obama, the man who had once carried the hopes of a nation, now standing not as a former president but as a father. The officers who moments earlier had wielded unchecked authority now found themselves shrinking under the weight of his presence. Their posture faltered, their confidence evaporated. Sasha stood frozen, her chest heaving, the humiliation still burning on her skin. She wanted to rush into her father's arms, but she could not move. The sting of what had just happened was too raw. Even in his presence, she felt the invisible chains of prejudice still wrapped tightly around her. Barack did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His calmness was sharper than anger, a mirror that forced the officers to see their own cruelty. "Explain to me," he said, "why my daughter is being treated as a criminal." The staff stammered, fumbling for words, their excuses collapsing under the weight of truth. They muttered about procedure, about suspicion, about doing their job, but their tone betrayed them. Everyone watching knew the truth that this was not about security. This was about bias, about the color of her skin, about the prejudice that had crept into their judgment and poisoned their actions. The crowd that had once stood silent now shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others held their phones high, recording every second. And in those recordings, the world would soon see not just a father protecting his daughter, but a reflection of the injustice that too many endure in silence. The officers, now desperate, tried to backpedal. They offered apologies that rang hollow, words that did nothing to erase the humiliation Sasha had endured. They tried to restore her boarding pass, to piece together the dignity they had torn apart. But dignity, once stripped so publicly, does not return with a simple sorry. For Sasha, the moment would never be forgotten. It was not the first time she had felt the sting of racism, but it was the most brutal. It reminded her of something. Her father had often spoken of that progress in America was real. That no matter how high one climbed, prejudice could still reach up and drag you down. And yet, as painful as it was, this moment also held power. Because what had been done in shadows was now dragged into the light. Millions would soon watch the footage. They would see the humiliation, they would hear the excuses, and they would be forced to confront a truth many preferred to ignore, that racism does not vanish with titles or wealth or legacy. It cuts across all lines, striking anyone, anywhere, without warning. For Barack, the pain was twofold. He was no longer president. He could not issue orders, could not command systems to change with the stroke of a pen. But as a father, standing there, in that terminal, he carried a different authority, the authority of truth. His presence exposed the fragility of those who had abused their power, and his silence spoke louder than their excuses ever could. The incident ended, but the scars remained. Sasha collected her belongings with trembling hands, her father's steady presence the only thing anchoring her. Together, they walked away not in defeat, but in defiance. Because every step they took carried the weight of a larger struggle, one that stretched far beyond the walls of that airport. And for those who watched, for those who later clicked, on the video, the question was no longer about Sasha alone. It was about everyone who had ever been stopped, doubted, or discarded simply because of who they were. How many more stories like this remain untold? How many more daughters, sons, mothers, and fathers must face humiliation before the world decides that enough is enough? The airport staff may have tried to reduce her to a suspect, but what they truly did was reveal a deeper wound in society. A wound that demands to be healed, not hidden. And so the story lingers, not just as a moment of pain, but as a call to action. To see, to listen, to change, because if this can happen to Sasha Obama, the daughter of a president, then who among? The U.S. is truly safe from prejudice,